The Beaver Banter Podcast. My name is CJ Baumgartner. Ian Rivers, my co-host. And Ian, it's, I want to say a quiet week, although it's not really because men's hockey didn't play, but doesn't it just, this is not to make insignificant of the other sports, Ian, but when men's hockey doesn't play, does it just kind of feel a little off?
It does. It does. It's not the same. We're used to our normal rotation of winter sports, and when one of them is not playing, it obviously makes it weird to follow because I'm more used to paying a little bit closer attention. No offense to the basketball team, but I pay a little bit closer attention to the hockey team when they're playing. I still do watch the basketball games
You
as
bought
much
that
as I
Flow Hockey
can, but
subscription. You better use it.
yeah, dude, like that's $30 a month that I gotta at least use. But this weekend got a good opportunity to watch the basketball team as much as I could, anyways, and that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, so why don't we talk a little bit about that men's basketball game because things really were close for Bemidji State on Friday night. They hosted the number 2 team in the country in Mankato and took them to overtime. And this was a team that competed with Moorhead in Moorhead early in the season. We said, "Hey, this Bemidji State team has the capability to run with a top 5 team in the country." And they were so close. They lost in overtime. But Ian, what's your quick synopsis of the game?
I think BSU did a lot of things well. They shot the 3 ball. I mean, they shot pretty close to what Mankato shot, especially from deep. There was not a whole lot, like we said, going into the week. BSU is probably going to have to play one of their better games to give Mankato a good run for their money, and it seems like they did. When you look at the overall points scored per half, it was 42-42 at halftime, and it was, well, I'm not sure exactly. Quick math would be 88-88 at the end of regulation. So tie game all the way up until the last couple of seconds of overtime, basically, and Mankato gets a 6-4 win in overtime, which means that we lose by 2. But it's a moral victory that really kind of sucks to have to stomach, because you don't get a lot for a moral victory in college athletics. Like, you still are one game below in the standings. This would be a great win, for a program that is on the up and up right now in BSU, but you're not obviously going to be too disappointed. Mankato was undefeated coming into this game. Like I said, you're not going to be too defeated for losing that game. Obviously, it stinks. Would you rather lose this game by 10, because you're closer? You're in a close game until the end, and then they make some free throws late to pull away. Maybe, because going all the way to overtime just to lose at home, that sucks. I'll tell you that. But yeah, not a whole lot that BSU did wrong. 11 turnovers on the day, which, again, pretty typical. That's not a terrible number. Obviously, you want to have 0 turnovers, but it's just not going to happen. Mankato only had 5 turnovers. I think that's probably what helped them in the end. Obviously, you take it to overtime, everything is as close as you can possibly make it. There's nothing that really stood out as something that BSU did egregiously wrong. Rebounding was completely neck and neck, 44-46. BSU with a slight advantage. So I think it was just 2 pretty good teams, playing against each other, and BSU unfortunately lost their first home game of the season.
Yeah, you mentioned those turnovers, and like you said, 11 turnovers isn't that unnecessary. It's not that cumbersome of a stat for a team to have to overcome. But when Mankato only does 5, I mean, this is like they're the number 2 team in the country, number 3, depending on whatever poll you want to look at. They're just good, and they're not going to make a ton of mistakes. And even if you make a normal amount of mistakes, even if you make a decent amount of mistakes, like they're going to make you pay for almost everything. If you miss a shot on one end of the floor, if you're up by 5 and you miss a shot, midway through the second half, and it feels, every little misstep you have feels big because the other team is talented enough to exploit it. And that's nothing on Bemidji State. It's just sometimes you run into, not a buzzsaw, but sometimes you just run into a really, really good team. Now, it'll be really interesting in like a month and a half when these two teams meet up again, February 24th. It's the last game of the regular season. It's in Mankato. So it'll be fascinating to see where the program sits at that point in the game. But overall, I mean, there's not much you can really get after for this Bemidji State team. BJ Davis continues to have a nice season. He had 22 points in the ball game. Sutherland chipped in 21. Tate Olson and John Pekarich, which we'll talk a little bit more about kind of when we talk about that Winona game, they both chipped in 17 from Olson, 9 from Pekarich respectively. So like there's some things in here to look back on. Like you said, you can't really, moral victories aren't always fun. Like you don't want to be, at the end of the day, moral victories are moral victories, but it's still a great sign that Mankato and Moorhead are two of the top teams in the country. And each time you've played them, you've met their level of intensity and you've had to make them really, really earn it.
Absolutely. I think it was and especially at home, like this team just seems to be, they play a different breed of basketball at home, man. And like you said, we'll touch on a little bit of what that's about, when we talk about the Winona game, but they're really good at home. And that's why I think it's super important that even if they can't get that, buy straight into Sioux Falls by getting a top 4 seed in the NSIC, get one of the 5th through 8th spots so that you get that playoff game at home. And I think, obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about exact seeding as the season moves along and what we want and who do we want to avoid, in the potential in the second round or whatever. But yeah, get a home game because this team is lights out at home. Sutherland continues to impress. Like you said, Olson and Albrecht not only adding points but also double-digit rebounds from both of those players. So. And yeah, like you said, BJ Davis, he's been a bright spot on this team from the guard play.
And it's not a 1v1 comparison for Davis, but we kind of talked about Kone was a big part of the success of Bemidji State last year. And for him to come in and, I can't say like 1-for-1, he's replaced everything he's been able to, but just from getting production out of your point guard, you're able to get a lot of that from Davis, which has been really, really nice for Bemidji State this season.
Yeah. Like we said, we want some of those guards to step up, and you look at the box score, and it's almost like every game there's a different guard that's got that leads the team in scoring, at least from that position, whether or not Sutherland or Albrecht goes off in that game. But for both games this weekend, the leading guard scorer was Mr. BJ Davis, and actually the leading scorer in both games for the Beavers. I think if we want to transition now into that Winona State game.
Yeah.
BJ Davis with 19. There was 6 players for BSU in double-digit scoring. In case you missed it, this was a blowout for BSU. And I mean,
against a team relatively close to them in the standings.
Yeah. Winona, let's check. I have it up here. Winona was just a game back coming into the weekend, I believe, from BSU, and they're still 6-4. They've played one more game than BSU has. BSU 6-4 in conference. Winona State, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. 4-6. So yeah, Winona State got swept over the weekend. BSU split, so they picked up an extra game over Winona State. So I mean, yeah, it was a team that was pretty close to you in the standings. And the final score 90. I'm sorry, wrong game. Close out of that one. It was 92 or 93. 93-58 as we finally get the correct score out. And I believe I can try to find the play-by-play here and scroll back. It was a pretty close game at one point. It was 23-22, 22-22. 20, yep. And then this is where BSU starts to pull away. It was 23-22 at one point after a 3-pointer by Connor Drew for Winona State. And the first half ended up finishing out. It was BSU 51 and Winona State 28. And that was after a last-second layup for Winona State. It was 51-26. So a really big scoring run there for BSU. And they just never turned it around for Winona. BSU never looked back. Like I said, 6 players in double-digit scoring.
Bemidji State, by the way, outscored, according to BSUBeavers.com, outscored Winona State 70-36 over the final 28 minutes of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it was as soon as that switch got flipped. I mean, BSU's 3-point shooting there in the last, 8 minutes of the first half was unbelievable. It was like they were just pulling up from heat check, and they just kept going in. So they just kept shooting them. Points in the paint, 42-32. Points off turnovers. And this is a big thing because the turnover margin was pretty tight. BSU with 10, Winona only had 11, but BSU had 20 points off turnovers. Winona only had 5. And then the other big disparity, other than the field goal shoot, okay, because Winona shot 39% from the field and 22% from 3. BSU shot 50% from the field, 45.8%. They went 11 of 24 from 3-point range, 11 3-pointers made. That is going to be a pretty big helper.
DJ Davis was 5 for 6 of 3.
5 for 6. Yeah, he played lights out in this game. Tate Olson, 1 of 2.
New York Mills, stand up.
Yep. John Pekarich, that's another guy who stood out to me in this game. He had 12 points.
Brainerd High School, stand up.
Yep. He's a freshman, and he's put in some good minutes for this team lately. I mean, I think it's crazy how deep this team is, and how these games especially are important for that, because they've got a lot of young talent on this team, and that young talent played a lot of minutes in the second half. You look at the difference between the minute disparity from that Minnesota State game, which was such a tight game against one of the top teams in the country. All of the starters played over 33 minutes in that game. And then you had 2 bench players get 15, and that was Pekarich and Daxton Daly. And then, I'm sorry, sir, but I'm going to butcher your last name, Daniel. Daniel, I'm not even going to attempt it. I'd have to look at a media guide.
Hold on.
To see.
Okay, yeah, here, let me. There's a pronunciation guide on the Beavers website.
You pull that up so that I do not make a fool out of myself.
Daniel Ijad Mbola.
That sounds correct.
He
put 9 minutes in that Mankato game. And then you look at just how many players got on the court and how many minutes the younger guys got in that game against Winona State. That's a huge key for the success of this team, not only for the rest of the year, but going forward. And then what do we always talk about, CJ? The rebounding battle. There was a plus 19. That's what BSU ended up, 48-29 in this game over Winona in the rebounding battle. It was just pure dominance from BSU from start to finish. And you really can't say much else about it. Winona State shot an abysmal 39% from free throw stripe in this game. They were 2 for 2 in the first half and 7 of 21 in the second half. That's going to put a damper on your comeback efforts if you are shooting.
And I don't know how much you were able to watch of the game, but was it more just, oh my gosh, Winona can't hit a shot to save their life? Or is it like Bemidji State's forcing them to take tough shots? Because there's always 2 sides of that coin of, hey, sometimes it's just our night and sometimes it's just not, versus no, they were being forced to take some really bad shots.
At least in the first half, when that real run started for BSU, because I only watched the first half of this game. I don't remember what I had to run and go do. I don't think it was super serious, but I think, I saw the 25-point halftime lead and I said, you know what? It's probably pretty safe. I kept checking the score, making sure it was still, a distant game. But in the first half, yeah, it was a little bit of a combination of BSU playing really good defense and Winona just chucking up some shots that just were not going down. It was a tough shooting day for them, combined with the fact that BSU was creating havoc defensively and creating some turnovers. And man, they just didn't miss any shots. I mean, they got 51 points in the first half. So I think it was a little bit of a combination of everything in that game. And so, yeah, I mean, it was, like I said, just pure dominance, especially in that first half, from what I saw for BSU.
Yeah, another great weekend or a great Saturday game. And again, it's, you can't blame them for splitting on the weekend. And in the way, if they were going to split, this was about the best possible way to do it. And now they come up, Ian, on Augustana and Wayne State, both of them in Bemidji over the weekend, this coming weekend. What's kind of your outlook for those 2 teams? Obviously, Augustana, a team Bemidji State slayed a couple different times last season, including in the postseason. What are your expectations for this one?
This is a little bit of a sleeper weekend because both of these teams, I think, are a lot better than the standings will show. If you look at the conference records, Augustana is about a game and a half back from BSU at 5-6, and Wayne State down at 4-7. And I guess maybe I don't know because Wayne State went 6-0 out of conference. They are 11-7 on the season, and Augustana is 10-7 on the season. So both of those teams have better out of conference records, but I don't know who these teams have played if they were any good. Maybe they played Oak Hills 6 times out of conference, and that's why they were 6-0. I could be wrong, but yeah, both games are at home. I think if BSU wants to put some serious pressure on the top 4, because BSU currently sits in 5th place in the conference. MSU Moorhead actually dropped a game this weekend. I'm not sure who to, but Minnesota State now sits alone at 10-0 on top of the conference. So you got Minnesota State at 10-0, MSU Moorhead at 9-1, Minot State, who the Beavers have beaten, at 8-2 in the conference, and Minnesota Duluth at 7-3. Then sits the Beavers in 5th place at 6-4. So if you want to put some pressure on those teams, I think you want to sweep this weekend, especially
MSUM, by the way. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but they lost 70-68 to Sioux Falls in Moorhead.
Ooh, Sioux Falls. They're kind of that's a team that BSU's played close.
They won 75-74. Yeah,
on a last second shot. So that's Sioux Falls making up some ground there. That's stealing a win, on your weekend. If there's a Sioux Falls podcast out there, they're probably talking just like we were, except for Sioux Falls was barely able to squeak out that victory, and Bemidji was not this weekend. But yeah, I think this is a weekend you probably want to sweep if you want to seriously contend for that home or not a home playoff game, but getting into that top 4, breaking in to that top 4, that higher echelon of the NSIC. But I think, we've had such a good track record at home this year. It almost sucks to sit here and say, like, you want to at least split, which you do. You don't want to drop both of these games, but you got 3 straight games on the road, 2 of which against top 4 teams coming up after this weekend. So if you want to get some serious games in hand here and some wins here before February starts, I think this is the place you got to look to do it.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is, again, looking at these standings in the top 4 of the NSIC, Minnesota Duluth, wherever they end up is wherever they end up. I'm looking at Minot State as a team that the Beavers could potentially look at jumping. Keep in mind, Bemidji State beat them in the first conference game of the year. And based on the schedule, they really haven't had to play a ton of the Blue Bloods in the conference if you're Minot State, looking at their schedule. So if you're looking for a team to jump, if you're Bemidji State, because looking up ahead at the schedule for Minot State, they got to play Mankato and Winona State over this coming weekend. Then they'll play Augustana and Wayne. They're going to come back and host us, and then go to Mary, and then they're going to play Moorhead, and then they're going to play St. Cloud State. They're going to play UMD again, and then they'll have to play Southwest and Sioux Falls. So they have some games coming up on the schedule that'll be tough. Now, Minot's done a good job so far, but I think if you're looking at a team that could slip up in the second half of conference play, if you're Bemidji State and look to jump them, it'd be the other Beavers.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think the more that I look at the upcoming schedule here for BSU, the more I want to sweep this weekend, just because you've got a game against Concordia St. Paul next weekend, or I'm sorry, 2 weekends from now. And then, but you've got games coming up against Minnesota Duluth, Minot State, and MSU Moorhead back to back to back. And then after that is Northern State. So that's a lot of teams that have beaten you in Northern State, even though their record doesn't look too promising. And then those are 3 straight games against top 4 teams in the conference. As my dog gets excited that my wife has just come home. Most of you probably heard my garage door just open.
We got to brighten up. We got to brighten up our video stream. We got to get the dog in there. Yeah,
the dog is wondering. She's looking out the window, even though the blind is closed. She's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but yeah. So, anyways, BSU basketball. Let's hope for a sweep this weekend. I think that's probably in our best interest moving forward. because honestly, there's not a ton of layup games, if we want to use basketball terms here, coming down the stretch. Even most of your easier games in terms of where the records are on the road. So
Yeah.
I think that this is going to be a battle tested team come tournament time. But yeah, I think this is a big weekend in terms of where you want to pick up some wins.
A big weekend upcoming for the men's team. Ian, let's quickly recap what went on in women's basketball over the weekend. Obviously, hosting the same two teams that Bemidji State did. What's the prognosis for them?
Well, it's another sweep and another very close loss that you would have hoped to be able to pull out at the end there. Against receiving votes, Minnesota State was pretty ugly. It was almost a 30-point defeat in the BSU gymnasium, 51-79. But the Mavericks have a pretty good team there. And it was pretty much right from the get-go. MSU won that first quarter 22-7. And BSU with a little bit of life in that second quarter, putting together 19 points, but allowing 14, and then some more, you get a little bit more distraught in the second half. Minnesota State only shot 6% from the three-point line in this game, 1 of 16, and BSU still was not able to take advantage of that. So not great. The turnover number was pretty substantial for BSU, 29 in this game, which led to 30 points off of turnovers for the Mavericks. You're not going to win too many games when you turn the ball over 29 times. So that's a pretty quick prognosis of what went wrong in that game.
So looking at Saturday's game against Winona State, had a chance to get a win. Winona State does come out on top 44-43. They go to 4-6 in the NSIC, 5-10 overall. This was a game, if you're Bemidji State, you thought maybe they had a chance of stealing. And early on, it looked like it. When you look at the halftime score, Bemidji State with a 21-20 lead. In that third quarter, they only scored 5 points compared to Winona State's 12. So again, a 6-point advantage for them heading into the fourth quarter, and Bemidji State outscored in the fourth, but ultimately that third quarter just kind of put them a little bit too far back. They scored 17 points in the fourth quarter compared to Winona State's 12, and the Beavers fall short by a point. And, again, I'm box score watching a little bit here, so maybe I'm off on something, but it feels like two teams kind of similar in how they want to play the game of basketball, which is trying to get that inside game and the battle of the boards and things we talk about. Because Winona State, Ian, 0% from three. They did not make a single three-pointer in this entire game, but they out-rebounded the Beavers 43-33. The turnover margin, Winona State turned the ball over 20 times compared to BSU's 18. But again, the turnover margin is important. But as we talk about the men's side, so is the rebounding, because that can give your offense an extra possession. And that's almost just as good or even better than a turnover, because you get the ball. If it's an offensive rebound, you get it right underneath your own hoop, put it back in. There you go. There's your points. So it's just one of those things where Bemidji State, that was your game to win on the weekend and get a split and have your opportunity. They were right there for it. And despite all the things that didn't go right for them, it's just that third quarter that really sunk them in the end.
That's unbelievable. BSU's 3-point defense has been astronomical. They went 1 of 31 on the weekend for their opponents. BSU shot 36 3-pointers on Saturday. That was on Friday. That seems, maybe, you're trying to dig back in the game, and that's probably a little bit what goes into it. But one of the main issues, and something that we brought up last week, BSU only got to the free throw line 12 times all weekend. That's not enough free throw shooting to help you win ball games. And in the closer game, in the game against Winona that you were hoping to maybe pull out a win, you shot 4 free throw attempts, 0 in the second half. You got to get that ball into the post. You got to be aggressive and try to get some free throw attempts. How many fouls if you didn't shoot a single free throw, did Winona State have like 4 fouls on the game? Like that seems unbelievable to me, that you could only personal fouls, 12 personal fouls, only apparently 3 of which led to, or probably 2 of which led to BSU shooting free throws. So,
well, the quarters make it a little bit different, because I think it's 5 into the bonus. in the quarters compared to
Yeah,
the
that
halves.
could be. That could be. But yeah, I mean, either way, again, I guess I'll preach that going into this next week. Get to the free throw line. Try to get to the free throw line a little bit more, especially this weekend because you're at home. And if you're going to pick up a pair of conference wins, this might be the weekend to do it. Looking at the women's standings, obviously Bemidji State still winless at 0-10 down at the bottom, but you play Wayne State and you play Augustana this weekend. Wayne State 1-10 in conference on the season, 4-10 overall. Augustana 3-8 in conference, 4-11 overall. So those teams are right there. Like I said, if you're going to pick up a sweep, a big weekend, even a win this weekend, try to climb your way, get some momentum, build towards the end of the season. We'll see what happens this weekend, and maybe we'll start talking dancing, at least NSIC tournament dancing, if the Beavers can pull off a sweep here.
So let's shift gears and talk a little hockey. The women's hockey team had a tough task having to go and play Minnesota Duluth. Believe it was on the road. And Ian, what happened over the weekend?
Man, it was eerily similar to that first weekend we had against Minnesota Duluth. It really was. The first game really close. The first game in October, BSU actually led 1-2, or I'm sorry, led 1-0 going into the third period. And this one, my sources tell me that it probably should have been 1-1 at multiple occasions this weekend, but an empty netter for Minnesota Duluth, and it turns into a shutout for Duluth, 2-0. But BSU played really well in that game. Could have gotten it to overtime, maybe if you get a little bit more puck luck. I know they scored a goal at one point. It was waved off for a high sticking. And then just like in October, Minnesota Duluth pulls out the stops on Saturday and wins 7-0. So no goal scorers for the Beavers this weekend. That might be the most disappointing thing. You now haven't scored since December 29th against Robert Morris. You've been shut out 3 straight games. But, hey, they played a solid game against a top 7 team on the road on Friday, and I think that is the main thing to take away from what I saw this weekend is this team is making leaps and bounds from even the start of the season, but especially compared to last season where this team was at. We are seeing improvement from this program.
Right. Like it felt like the more you got towards the end of the season that things not necessarily were getting worse a year ago, but it was more just like you can clearly tell everybody's like, we need to just be done for the year. Whereas this team, like you said, feels like they're kind of at the very least picking up some momentum. We're progressing as the season is going along. They're going to need to because they're playing another tough opponent, this time at the Sanford Center, playing the University of Minnesota. In fact, Saturday's game, which has a 3:01 puck drop, is going to be on Fox 9 Plus. So it's going to be televised on local TV. There you go. A little positivity there. You can watch the BSU women's skate a little bit.
And if you are in the Bemidji area or surrounding area, you can also get $2 tickets to this
$2
game.
tickets?
Yes, the Sanford Center posted that on X or Twitter, whatever you decide to call that website, that there will be $2 tickets. I can pull up the actual tweet here for anybody who's interested because there's some sort of deal going on.
That's for Saturday's game?
I think it's just for the weekend. I could be wrong.
Well, my guess is for sure because the local TV is coming that you want to get people, you want to get butts and seats for that Saturday game for sure. That's going to be televised, would be my guess. At least that plays a little bit into it.
So the Sanford Center tweeted earlier today at 12:56 p.m. $2 tickets, popcorn, and hot dogs for this weekend's women's hockey series between the Bemidji State University Beavers and the University of Minnesota. Friday's game starts at 6:01 p.m. and Saturday's game starts at 3:01 p.m. See you there. So it looks like both games you can get $2 tickets, $2 $2 popcorn, and $2 hot dogs. So trying what they can to get butts and seats. So yeah, I mean, if you're up there, that's a tempting enough deal where, hey, BSU women's hockey has struggled this year. They're 3-18-1. But even if you don't want to go out and watch that, they're playing a top 5 team. They've been improving. Go out and see if you can see one of those upsets that we were used to seeing in the past. Like we talked about all the way back to when we were on R&B, this team would pull some of those upsets every once and then, and so why not? It's going to be cheap. Get out there, get to the Sanford Center, and then go home and cozy up and watch the men's team sweep the Huskies this weekend.
That's a good segue into our men's preview for the weekend. And they got the Huskies coming up. This is we've kind of teased it for the last couple weekends that it's going to be a big series for them. And I guess just explain it one more time. What is the implications for this weekend for BSU?
Yeah, I mean, the standings are so tight right now that it's just every point that you can get in this conference is insanely large. And over the weekend, BSU got a little help, but also didn't get that much help because Lake Superior State swept Northern Michigan and Minnesota State swept Ferris State, I believe. And St. Thomas, though, swept Michigan Tech, who was the current leader in points per game in the conference. So that helps the Beavers in some way. But also the Tommies have now jumped you by 2 points, but you're level on games played. So you have an opportunity to make that up. But BSU's been inconsistent. It'll be interesting to see who's playing in this game. Polkamp and Magnuson, I'm assuming, will be back and healthy. Will Liam Engstrom be healthy for this game? How are the Beavers going to look in it? I really would love to see a split this weekend. I feel like going into Houghton, Michigan Tech is reeling. They just got swept by St. Thomas. They know that they need some points here, especially at home. They are probably going to be pissed off that they gave up that 4-0 lead in the last game in Bemidji. There's tons of implications, for this game. And I would love to see another weekend that makes me super confident that BSU can, not have another big collapse in the second half of the season, because I don't think we've seen a ton of evidence yet that that's not going to happen. We've only seen 2 games since the new year rolled over, right? And we've split with the last place team in the CCHA. So show me that that's not going to happen again this year. Go and get at least like 2 points off of Michigan Tech, just so you stay in that race at the very least for home ice. It's such a tight race. And I think, we'll start talking rooting guides. I'm going to start saying, like, looking at the schedule and say, hey, here's who you want to root for if you are pulling for BSU to win the CCHA. And of course, depending on how the season goes over the next couple of weeks, we can adjust that and say, here's what you need to root for if we don't want home ice, or if we want to avoid getting the 8th seed in the conference. So we'll adjust that. But for this weekend, Lake Superior State takes on Ferris State. Obviously, you're going to want to pull for Ferris State in that one. I believe that's a home and home. Bemidji State, obviously, you're going to pull for them over Michigan Tech. St. Thomas plays Northern Michigan. You're going to want Northern Michigan to take any points they can off the Tommies in that series. Hopefully, because it's in Marquette, Northern Michigan can take 5 to 6 points off the Tommies. And then Bowling Green hosts Minnesota State. And you want Bowling Green, obviously, to take the points in that weekend series. But, of course, none of it's going to matter if BSU cannot take care of business and at least come away with 2 to 4 points, God forbid, on this weekend. Last year, the first conference series of the year was against Michigan Tech in Houghton, and the Beavers took 5 of 6 points from that weekend with a win and a tie, followed by a shootout win for the Beavers. I'm going into it pretty hopeful. I don't know that I'm necessarily super optimistic, but we're going to get some players back. We're rested. Michigan Tech just played a tough series against the Tommies team who's leading the conference. Go ahead and put some distance between yourself and at least that home ice cutoff. Right now, you have a 6-point lead over the Huskies, who are in 5th place. So if you get swept, you're tied with them. You could fall all the way down to 5th place if this weekend does not go your way. And that would be a pretty rough weekend, depending on how other weekend series go, because of the fact that you were just in 1st place, 4 or 5 days ago. That would be a pretty tough pill to swallow. We knew it was a reality just because of how close the conference was. But you're going to want to pick up some points in this series, especially because Michigan Tech still has those 2 games in hand on you.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be a big one this weekend for Bemidji State men's hockey. Ian, any other BSU men's hockey things you want to get off your chest for this week? Otherwise, we got a couple other news and notes to clean up on here as we wrap up the podcast for the week.
I don't think so. I haven't seen anything news-wise about the hockey team that needs to come out. But yeah, I hope, man, I'm just so hopeful. I'm so hopeful that we can turn this season not around, but not have it fall completely flat on our faces and end up with like the 6 or 7 seed, because depending on how bad it goes, that could very well be. But I think Bemidji has a pretty favorable schedule, coming down the series against Northern Michigan and Ferris State, who have been a couple of the bottom feeders in the conference. And then you have, your work cut out for you. If you want home ice, you've got plenty of games against St. Thomas, Minnesota State, and Michigan Tech. So it's all there in front of the Beavers. We just have to see if they're going to take the reins.
In women's hockey news, alum Sadie Lundquist has been named the first director of women's hockey at College Hockey Inc. So what she's going to be doing, according to a couple different articles, has said that she's going to be begin a new role as the organization's first ever director of women's hockey, working to grow the game of women's hockey. So congratulations to BSU alum Sadie Lundquist on getting named to that honor.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's women's hockey is a growing thing. I think it's the PWHL. I could be getting that.
Yeah, they just started their
wrong.
thing.
They just started, their hockey, and they had some pretty good success getting people into the XL Energy Center for their first game in Minnesota. So it's a growing game in the women's side, and hopefully we get some more of that at the college level too, because I think that the lack of parity just stems from lack of, I don't know if it's lack of awareness that women's hockey is a thing, but lack of exposure for the sport might be a thing. The only teams that get watched are the teams that make the tournament every year. Minnesota, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Boston College, I think, is one of those teams that's consistently out east that makes the tournament. I could be wrong. Northeastern for sure has a good team. So those teams consistently get the good recruits. If you can grow the game a little bit, maybe it helps with that parity.
In football news, Ty Cobb and Marcus Hansen landed on another All-America list, this time by the Don Hansen All-America list. Ty Cobb, Marcus Hansen, your All-Americans. I'm looking to double check here on if it was like first team, second team. But right now, I think all we're just getting here is All-Americans. So Cobb earns a third All-American honor, while Hansen garners his second All-American accolade. So again, we find a way to talk football here in this podcast. So congratulations again to lineman Ty Cobb and to defensive specialist there, Marcus Hansen. It appears that Hansen got an All-American honorable mention, and Ty Cobb got All-American second team, according to this article. So again, we found a way to talk Beaver football this week. We talked Beaver football, I think, a week before with Gunnar Olszewski. So, Ian, we got to find one little sliver just to keep that streak alive for the week coming up.
Yeah, last year it was Beaver soccer that just kept getting brought up into like the new year, even it felt like, and now it's Beaver football. And, as we've said before, every time they get, one or more of these honors, it's good recognition for them, because they obviously had a great season.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for Beaver Banter. Me and Ian will be back next week, and if we, hopefully have some good things to talk about with the men's hockey side, women's basketball, women's hockey, men's basketball, or more football news if we need it. So
either way, I'm sure you'll be entertained. That is a little hint at what we might have coming down next weekend. We'll have some entertainment for you. Yeah, and hey, by the way, keep your eye out. Spring sports are right around the corner. I know it does not feel like it because it's like the coldest time of the year, which is just great, by the way, having a job that makes you work outside and having to work this last weekend. But spring sports start up in 18 days, people. That's when the softball season starts. And then, a couple weeks after that is baseball. A week after that is tennis. So you know what? Keep your eye out, because they're starting soon if you are a fan of Beavers spring sports.
They're coming up is basically the big thing. So be ready for that. Be ready for an episode next week. Ian promises entertainment in that one as well. So my name is CJ Baumgartner. That's Ian Rivers. This has been, I was about to call it R&B Sports Talk, just out of that reflex. But this has been the Beaver Banter Podcast, and we'll check you guys